Hi everyone. I'm going to play some tactical puzzles on chess.com. Going to ignore the timer over here. Just play slowly, try to get them correct. Okay, so white just pushed pawn to h3. Let's see, what's the material count? Looks equal. So what are the features of the position here? So my king is relatively safe here. His king is in a little bit of danger with the rook on the 7th. Queen and bishop protecting each other. Knight protected by the pawn. Rook currently protected by the king and queen. He has a loose pawn on e4. No, that's not loose. The knight's protecting it. So he has no loose pieces or pawns. Everything's protected. Okay, so a couple ideas come to mind. Try to attack on g2. It's one idea. Another idea is try to decoy the queen so that it's no longer defending the bishop. In fact, one candidate move we'll go ahead and analyze right now is rook to c2, attacking the queen. So where does it go? In order to stay in contact with the bishop, I think it has to go to e1. But then I can play rook to e2, forking the queen and the bishop, winning the bishop. Looks good. I see no follow-up. There's always this check here, king here. There's no perpetual. So any other moves after rook c2? Does he have a counterattack? Now he has nowhere to go with that queen. So that's the move, I believe. Rook c2. And then rook e2. Let's look at it just one more time. So rook e2 forks the queen and the bishop. And he moves the queen maybe here or here. Actually, this is a little interesting. If I play rook e2, it's got queen h4. Oh, luckily I can take the bishop with check. For example, if I take the bishop with the rook, then there is an interesting, very interesting perpetual check with knight to f7 check, king h7, and then knight to g5 check because the pawn is pinned. And then the king has to go back, and the knight goes back, and the knight cycles back and forth between these two squares. That's pretty interesting. But I can take the bishop with check with the queen. So this is the move. He just moves here. Okay. That's not much of a move. I thought that was more interesting. So I can take the bishop. Which piece do I take it with? Let's say I take with the queen, which looks more forcing because I'm calling check and I'm forking the king and queen. So there is only one move there. Queen takes queen, rook takes queen, and I'm a piece up. I don't see any counterplay. So why is he making me make another move? What happens if I take with the rook? Is that bad? Gives him more options because he's not in check. Yeah, he can take the pawn, I guess. Start attacking. Yeah, that's a mate threat. So I don't want to take with the rook. Let's play a more forcing move. Okay, that's it. So 2005 rated puzzle. Let's try another one. Okay, just took a pawn. So I'm down one pawn in the position. Okay, but I'm better developed. I have 3 minor pieces developed. I have the rook on the central file already. His king is still stuck in the center. Okay, so checks captures threats. So there's one check in the position. I don't think it leads anywhere after the king takes the rook. There's no follow-up. So there's a capture here. That's the only capture besides bishop takes a6, which looks silly. So let's analyze the capture. Knight takes knight. He can't drop a piece. He's going to have to recapture. Is there anything I can do after that? Any follow-up? I don't see a move after that. Okay, so now threats. So one threat that comes to mind is knight to d5, threatening the pawn on c7 for a fork. So what can he do about that? The only way to protect the pawn is by moving the king to the d file, which gives me a discovery with the knight because there's a rook here on d1. I don't know if there's a, yeah, there's a move here, check, and then grabbing the rook in the corner. So after here, he can't move the king to the d file. So he's got to get out of the fork then. He can move the king over here and just drop the pawn. But then material's equal, he can move the rook. No, he can't move the rook. Let's say he does move the king over here and I take the pawn. Let's say he does move the rook here or here. Then don't I have a mate on the back rank? Rook to d8? Yeah, that's a mate. Okay. So king to f8 doesn't work because the knight comes here and there's a dual threat of a mate and a threat on the rook. All right, so what other moves does he have? He can't move his king. All king moves are bad. So he has to move the rook to get out of the fork. But it doesn't really matter where he moves the rook. I'll take the pawn with a check, force the king over, and then the rook goes to the back rank with mate. So knight to d5 simply wins material. Let's play it. Okay, he throws in that check first. Oh, I didn't even see that. It's interesting. Yeah, he removed his knight, opened up a square for his bishop to come and defend. Should have seen that. Yeah, I was looking at that check briefly in the corner of my eye during this, and I didn't really think it made any difference. With the recapture, things would be the same, but they're not. I have to actually analyze all moves. So that was poor analysis on my part. All right, I got lucky. Let's keep going. How do I follow this up? So obviously this isn't going to work. I don't see a follow-up move after that. I can attack the bishop. The bishop would have to fall there to keep in contact with that pawn. I don't see a good follow-up move there either. Keep imagining the bishop getting on this diagonal, but that diagonal can always be blocked in a couple ways. Okay. So what else is there? So a tougher puzzle than I thought. Can I get any other pieces into the action? Okay, let's go back to checks, captures, and threats. There's only 2 checks in the position, and that one doesn't seem to do anything. No, and this one doesn't seem to do anything. A lot of ways to recapture. Releasing the rook, but the rook has nowhere to go. So no checks. Let's look at captures. So the only other capture is this one. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, threats. We already looked at that threat. Pushing the pawn. Bishop goes to d6. And what's the follow-up to that? You can always try to decoy the bishop, bishop c5, and if it takes, then we take, and we win material. There's no mate anymore. There's always an escape square. But he doesn't have to doesn't have to take our bishop on c5, and that's not a threat. This bishop is, no, it is a threat. We take the bishop, he recaptures, and then we fork. Or he recaptures with the other pawn and we fork. So I guess that's a threat right there. It's a forced sequence. What is he going to do after that? Now he has time to do something like move for the king. And then if we take the bishop, he can take with the c pawn. I can attack the rook. You can move the rook. I don't see a follow-up. Yeah, the rook can stay protecting the bishop, so if there's a back rank check, he can slip out this way. The bishop is protected. It's kind of complicated. I didn't quite clearly see all of that. Let's talk it through without the arrows. I don't know if I'm clinging to nothing here and I should be looking for other candidate moves, but let me continue with f4, bishop d6, bishop c5, king f8, bishop takes d6, c takes d6, knight c7, rook b8, and yeah, earlier I was forgetting there's a black pawn here, so there isn't even a back rank check that I was thinking about. So I see no follow-up to that after rook b8. So let's look for other candidate moves besides f4, or maybe another candidate move after f4, bishop d6. Don't really see anything though. There's no other forcing moves in the position though. There's nothing with this bishop. Nothing I can do with that bishop, I don't think. Keep going back to this. That's the only move I can see here. Okay, well I'm going to give up on this. It's been 8 minutes and I'm going to try that. Okay, let's see what the solution was. Oh. Yeah, you pin the bishop to the rook. Yeah, let's retry that slowly. Okay. All right, so we attack on c7, we recapture, and then this move bishop to d4 is another way to try to decoy that bishop off of that square instead of my idea of f4 and then bishop to c5. It didn't make much sense because the bishop can just sit there. But if I do this and the bishop goes over here to protect, then I can get the rook. So if I do this, I'm threatening to win material, and if he takes my bishop, I can get the pawn and the rook for the bishop. If he doesn't take my bishop, he can protect it, but then I take, and I fork. And if he doesn't protect it and he tries to get out of the fork somehow, I just take it. So yeah, that's beautiful. I didn't see that. Okay, and then we take the bishop, and then our rook defends our knight. Okay, yeah, beautiful puzzle. All right, let's try another one. Okay, so material imbalance. I have a rook and pawn for bishop and knight. His king's in a bad spot. The back rank is weak because of these pawns. My king doesn't look like it's going to be checkmated anytime soon. His bishop is defending the back rank. I can't do something slow like attack the back rank from another direction and give him time to get lift. So one candidate move is rook to c7 to attack the bishop that's protecting the back rank and blockading my passed pawn. So let's analyze rook c7, knight takes c7, pawn takes c7. That releases an attack on the bishop from the other rook. So let me say that without the arrows, which confuse me. So rook c7, knight takes c7, pawn takes c7 with an attack on his bishop. If he moves the bishop, let's say, to a6, then I'm going to get a back rank mate with rook to b8 check. And I'll have two blocks and then I'll mate. And after rook c7, knight takes c7, b takes c7, if he moves the bishop to c8, then I can play rook to b8, and the bishop is lost because he doesn't have rook to d8. The pawn on c7 is defending d8. Okay. So what other moves does he have? After rook c7, knight takes c7, b takes c7. What else can he do? Can't defend the bishop with his rook. He has no checks, no threats. That just wins the bishop at least. So he can't take my rook then. So rook c7, knight takes c7 loses. So rook c7 attacking the bishop. He can't protect the bishop, so he moves it. Let's say he moves it to a6, and then I push the pawn to b7 with the threat of queening it and a threat of back rank mate with rook c8 mate. He can take the pawn, I take the bishop. I've got two rooks for the rook and knight. I'm up the exchange. That looks good. So I think it's rook to c7. Is there any counterattack while I'm taking his bishop on b7? Can he move his knight? I don't think so. His rook is not well placed on this square. Maybe if he moved it to this square, you can get the knight and coordinate against that, but I don't see any defense. Let's play rook c7. Okay, we'll take. So he just gets luffed. He's going to get a pawn for the bishop, but I'm still threatening to queen it. If I take the bishop, he can actually defend against queening. I see nothing else. We take the bishop. Puzzle's over. Okay, it was an easier one, 1992. Let's try another one. So his king is in danger. I'm down a rook. My king is in the open too, but his rooks are not active at the moment. He does have one safe check here. Okay, so what do I do? Forcing moves. Checks, captures, threats. So there are a couple checks. There's this check, or this check, or this check. Okay, let's look at rook g5 check. So that's defended by my queen. You can block with the bishop. No, then I take the bishop with check because the pawn is pinned thanks to that bishop. So he doesn't want to block with the bishop. He wants to move the king. Then what's the follow-up? There's checks like queen c3 check, but then he can push the pawn. It's no longer pinned and attack the rook. And I don't see a follow-up. So is there anything after rook g5 check, king h8? No, I don't see anything. So queen g5 check probably is no good. Queen takes queen, rook takes queen check, king goes over. I see no follow-up, and I'm still down a rook. Okay, so I don't like either check there. This looks silly. Check. Let's say, yeah, rook takes with check. I'm not giving a bishop away with check. There's no way that's the right move. Okay, so is there a threat? What if I take the bishop? I have to look at all captures. I mean, you can throw in this check. Let's just say he takes it though. There's a check with the bishop or the queen. It's block. Yeah, it doesn't look too good. After taking, doesn't look too forcing. I don't see a follow-up. So going beyond checks and captures, let's go to threats. Here's a nice threat. Queen to h6 threatens a mate on h7, and it also stops this check. So how does he defend after queen to h6? He has no safe checks in the position. There's a check here. I take. That doesn't change anything. He still has no safe checks. So he has to defend the bishop or move the rook to gain an escape square. Let's say he plays queen e4 to defend the bishop. So queen h6, queen e4. Then maybe rook g5 check. And if king h8, then queen to f6 is mate. Okay. So queen h6, queen e4, rook g5 check. He can't move the king, so he has to block with the bishop or queen. He probably doesn't want to block with the queen. He blocks with the bishop. I could just take the bishop. The pawn's pinned, and if he takes the rook, I just take the queen. Yeah, and I'm up. I've got winning material, queen and bishop versus two rooks, whereas king is still in trouble. Can always try to checkmate along that diagonal. So yeah, I think it's this, 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 and moving the king results in mate, and blocking with the bishop, I take the bishop. Okay, let's go for that. Okay, check, take the bishop, take the queen. All right, we found it. It took me a while. All right, that was only a 1989 rated puzzle. Let's do just one more. Okay, so I'm down a pawn and a bishop. Got some checks to work with here. My king is very vulnerable too. So I can't play any quiet moves because he has all kinds of checks. So I've got checks on the H file. I've got a check on the back rank, another check on the back rank. So it looks like I have 4 checks to consider. I don't really like this check because it can be blocked. Let's look at this check first. So rook to e1 check. No way to block it. Forces the king up. Maybe, yeah, I don't have this check. There's a queen on that square. So rook here check, king up. Let's say queen here. You can give up the bishop. You can give up the queen. So he has to move there. Then I can move the rook here, or I can move the queen here to check. A lot of checks, a lot of branching in this puzzle. That's difficult for me when there's a lot of different branching. It's hard to find forcing lines here. So let's try something else, see if I can find something more forcing. So let's say that's the move, queen h8 check, king g1, rook e1 check, king f2. Queen h4 check, defending the rook. G3. No more safe checks. Okay, check. 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 Okay, check. Check. That's a tough puzzle for me. Let me try it without drawing the arrows. So rook e1 check seems most forcing. King h2. What about queen e5 check there? And then if king h3, then I have rook h1 mate. So you'd have to block with g3. Then the only safe check is back to h8, queen h8 check. Yeah, let me say that again. This looks pretty forcing. Rook e1 check, king h2, queen e5 check. I believe that forces g3, queen h8 check, king g2, queen h1 check, king f2, queen f1 check, king e3, rook e1 check. Yeah, I've got two heavy pieces on him in the open there. Now, he doesn't have any loose pieces. They're all protected, but I think those two heavy pieces should be able to finish him off. So it's hard for me to see beyond, 7 or 8 moves there. So I'm going to go down that line because it's the most forcing and it seems promising to flush his king out into the open with the two majors. So let's try that. Check, check, check. Okay, gives away his pieces here. Just gives everything away. Why didn't he just move here? Let me look at the analysis. So here, here. Yeah, what I was saying before is he can't go here because that's an immediate mate. So he has to block. And then I go back. Why didn't he go here? It says mate in 2. I was looking at this move. Oh, yeah, I just didn't see it clearly. Couldn't see that in my head too clearly. So that's why I'm doing these puzzles, to practice my visualization. So I recommend this. This is a great exercise. If you're at my level or lower, get yourself some puzzles online somewhere and take your time and use them as an excuse to visualize. All right, thanks for watching.